This is Smart Poker Study, episode 181, Pre-Flop Strategies for Better 3-Bet Defense. In last week's strategy episode number 180, I gave you the symptoms and diagnosis for determining if you suffer from the leak of calling 3-bets and losing money. It's poker study time, y'all. Thank you so much for tuning in, for telling your friends, and for the wonderful ways that you support the show. And the best way that you can support is via Patreon. So please go to patreon.com/smartpokerstudy. By going there, there's different levels of support on a monthly basis, where once you do start supporting me, you'll have access to a patron-only archive of content, either podcasts or videos, or even both, depending on the level of support that you give. I really enjoy putting on the show every single week for you, and my Patreon supporters are what keep me keeping on. In just a few weeks, I'll be putting out the new content for April, the new Patreon-only content for April. So please get in there before that comes out. So please visit patreon.com/smartpokerstudy to start that support. Alrighty, I know that I kept you waiting until Sunday for this week's episode, so no further dilly-dally, let's get to it. In today's episode, I'm going to tell you and show you how to create your 3-bet defense ranges using Flopzilla. I'll also give you the 6 critical in-game factors that you need to consider before you decide to call a 3-bet or 4-bet over the top of it. So please visit the show notes page for everything I discussed today, along with screenshots and links at www.smartpokerstudy.com/pod181. And as a bonus for today, I just said I'm going to tell you and show you how to create your 3-bet defense ranges. Well, in the show notes page, there's an unlisted YouTube video embedded there that shows you how I use Flopzilla to create 3-bet defense ranges. You can't find it on YouTube because it's unlisted. Only those with the special link to it can view it. So please visit the show notes page once again, smartpokerstudy.com/pod181. Alrighty, let's do this. Gambate!
This is damn exciting stuff.
So when you're faced with a pre-flop 3-bet, you have 3 options, of course. The first is to fold. So if defending with a 4-bet or a call is negative EV, then folding, of course, is the best option. Your next option, if you don't choose to fold, is to 4-bet. And before you make that 4-bet, you need to know why you're making the play. If you're 4-betting for value, your opponent must continue with worse. If you're 4-bet bluffing, then they must fold often enough to make the bluff profitable. And if you don't want to fold, you don't want to 4-bet, your last option is to call. And you call when your hand plays well post-flop and it has equity versus the 3-better's range. Calling means that you want to see the flop and you're willing to take the hand through the streets and play some poker, basically. So whether or not calling 3-bets is a leak of yours, this is definitely a good podcast, a good strategy to listen to learn from, to, even if it's not a leak, to at least improve your 3-bet calling strategies. Some of you might be thinking, hey, if calling is a leak of yours, why don't you just switch it up to a 4-bet or folding game? Well, you don't really want to do that. You don't want to be so cut and dry like that. Calling can put you in valuable, positive EV situations. If you call with the right hands against the right opponents, for example, if they have every ace in their 3-betting range, then you dominate them when you're calling with ace-king and ace-queen, right? Calling can also be profitable with non-premium, speculative hands, suited connectors and medium pocket pairs. If you're facing a really small 3-bet, then they're offering you really good pot odds to continue with those speculative hands. For example, if your opponent min 3-bets you to just 5 big blinds over your 3 big blind open raise, that means you only need to call 2 big blinds to win a total pot of 8.5 big blinds. So at that price, you really need only less than 24% preflop equity to make a profitable call. So you can easily be calling with pocket 8s and 7-6 suited hands like that. And one of the great things about calling, especially when you're in position, is that you get to go post-flop in a bigger pot with position. And of course, we all know that positional advantage is the number one advantage in poker. So if your opponent has some post-flop weaknesses, and especially weaknesses in 3-bet pots, that is friggin' awesome. You're in position. You can exploit those weaknesses now. Alrighty, so let's get to the important stuff, creating a 3-bet defense range. By creating ranges off the felt, it allows you to take your logical and mathematical work that you do and apply it to your on the felt game. This is going to help to simplify your preflop decision making, and it'll free up brain space for situational considerations. So, for example, if you know that ace jack suited is a hand worthy of calling the 3-bet, when you're dealt the ace jack suited, you don't have to think about, oh, is this worthy of calling or not? You already know that it is. So now that you know that it is, you can look at the situation, look at the opponent, look at the bet sizing, look at all the other important factors instead of thinking about how strong that one hand is versus a 3-betting range. All right, so there are 6 steps to creating and using 3-bet defense ranges. Step number 1 is know your positional open raising ranges. So I recommend very simple, especially for 6-max games, and you can actually use these for full ring games as well. I really only recommend 4 different open raising ranges. That's from the EP, from the cutoff, from the button, and from the small blind. Those are the only ones that you really need to create. Now, some people do create EP, MP, cutoff, button, and small blind, but with an additional range right there, you have additional 3-bet defensive ranges to create. So I recommend just those 4 that I mentioned. And for today's example, we're going to go through the whole defense range, 3-bet defense range creation with a 20% cutoff open raising range as an example. So a 20% cutoff open raising range, it actually has 266 combos. And you can go to the show notes page to see a screenshot of a 20% cutoff range, but it's every pocket pair, ace deuce suited or better, king 7 suited or better, 9 7 suited or better, 6 5 suited or better, king queen offsuit, and then ace 8 offsuit or better. So 266 combos right there. Your next step is to determine your 3-bet defense frequency by position. So for most standard bet sizings, and you can see this in the video because I illustrate it pretty well, most bet sizings for 3 bets, they need to work as a bluff between 65 and 70% of the time. That means that we need to defend between 30 and 35% of the time. And for range building purposes, I just kind of cut things down the middle. I try to develop a 33% range, and then I kind of adjust it up or down based on whether I'm in position or out of position and the position of the opponent who's doing the 3-bet against me. So in this instance, we have 266 combos in our cutoff open raising ranges. 33% of that is 87 combos. So we need to build a 3-bet defense range of 87 combos. Now, step 3 is determine which ranges to create. Now, when you have EP, cutoff, button, and small blind open raising ranges, there's actually 7 3-bet defense ranges you need to create. So EP versus a cutoff 3-bet, EP versus button, EP versus the blinds. So those are the first 3. Now, in the cutoff versus the button, cutoff versus the blinds, button versus blinds, and small blind versus big blind. One of the great things about this is once we create this range right here, the cutoff versus the button, this is an out of position range that we're creating. Well, 3 others of these ranges, EP versus cutoff, EP versus button, and small blind versus big blind, are also out of position. So we can kind of take this one range that we're creating right now, tweak it up or down depending on the number of combos in our open raising ranges, and then bam, we have 4 more, or 3 additional, 4 total 3-bet defense ranges created pretty darn quickly. Step 4 is to actually get in there and build your total 3-bet defense ranges. So we've determined that in the cutoff, we have 266 open raising hands. We want to defend 33%, which ends up being 87 combos. So you want to whip out Flopzilla and start putting hands in. Don't worry about what hands you'll 4-bet and what hands you'll 3-bet. Just put in the hands that you know you want to defend against a 3-bet with. So for example, we know we want to do queens, kings, and aces. That's already 18 combos out of the 87 that we want. Of course, you're going to want ace, king, and ace, queen as well. Now we're at 50 combos. Let's look back at the pairs again. I really like jacks and 10s for 3-bet defense for sure because they're way ahead of all those random aces, all those random suited connectors, and the small to medium pocket pairs that our opponents might be 3-betting us with. Now if we look at this range, 10s are greater and ace queen are greater. We're already at 62 combos, so to build to that 87, we only have to add 25 more. So these first combos are kind of no-brainers. Now you've got to kind of think, you've got to pick and choose what you want. I really do like ace-jack suited, king-queen suited, and queen-jack suited. some nice suited stuff, connected stuff, and, obviously they're Broadway. I would much rather have Queen Jack suited than Jack 7 or 9-6 suited. So right there, adding those, we have 74 combos. I really like 9s as a defense as well, even though we are out of position. 9s has a pretty good defense, 9s have pretty good pre-flop equity versus some of those wide 3-bet ranges, especially from the button that we're going to be facing. So that takes us to 80 combos. Let's add one more. Let's add King Jack suited right there. Once we add that, we're at 84 combos. We have our entire range. You can see a screenshot of this in the show notes, but I'll also tell you what it is right now. 9s or greater, Ace Jack suited or greater, Ace Queen offsuit, King Jack suited, Queen Jack suited, and King Queen suited. So everything is up in the top left quadrant of Flopzilla right here. Now that we have created our range, we want to divide this range into calls and 4-bets. The first thing when it comes to 4-bets is really, I recommend no more than 25% of your range should be 4-bets. Once you start to get too many 4-bets in there, you're going to become like your super aggressive maniac opponents. When those opponents 4-bet way too often, it's really easy to just call, slow play, and let them spew off chips when you have aces or kings. You can also 5-bet get it in with tons of hands like 10s or better and ace king, maybe even ace queen suited against these players that just 4-bet way too often. So you don't want to be like your maniac, super aggressive, spewy opponents. Keep those ranges tight. 4-bet at most 25% of your 3-bet defense range. So if we just start by picking our most obvious 4-betting hands, kings, aces, and ace king suited. Now that already makes up 16 combos. 16 combos out of the 84 combos in our range is actually 19%. Now, we could add one more hand somewhere, maybe pocket queens, maybe, I don't know, like a 4-bet bluffing hand, ace 3 suited. That's totally up to you. But right now, for my own purposes, I am fine with 4-betting kings, aces, and ace king suited. So now that we know that these 16 combos are the 4-betting combos, well, the other 84 minus the other 68 combos are all going to be our calling combos, right? So queens, jacks, 10s, 9s, ace queen suited, king jack suited, ace jack suited, queen jack suited, king queen suited, ace king off, and ace queen offsuit. And you can see a screenshot of this in the show notes, of course. I just wanted to list it all off for you. So 68 combos we are calling, 16 combos we're 4-betting right here. That's a pretty darn good range that we're playing against 3-bets with. Now, the final step when creating ranges, of course, is to print them out, test them, assess them, and then adjust. So what you need to do, we created this range. Take the time to now go through and create the other 6 ranges that you need. Once you have them all out there, all set, you're ready to go, print them out, and then play with them over the next week, 2 weeks, or 3 weeks. At least 10K hands, preferably 20K hands or more. Now, your goal is to tag every hand that you face a 3-bet with and actually, study the hands, study how well they perform. You were calling with King Jack suited. Was that a good hand to call with? Did you actually win money when you were calling with King Jack suited? Was it a difficult hand to play with post flop? What about like 9s and 10s? Were those difficult to play versus 3-bets? I mean, that's totally up to you. That's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to assess the ranges and how well they performed versus the 3-betters that you faced. And then once you assess that a hand is not good for your range, like take that prior example of King Jack suited. If you, every time you opened raise with it and faced a 3-bet, if you hated facing the 3-bet, if you never wanted a 4-bet, and if you never wanted to call, then screw that hand, take it out. That gives you 4 combos, King Jack suited, there's only 4 combos of that hand. That gives you 4 combos to mess with. So you can add, 7-6 suited. You can add 10-9 suited to the range. You can add pocket 8s to the range. You just pulled out 4, you're adding 6 more. That means you're upping the range by 2 combos total. That's not bad at all. That's totally up to you. But if you determine that a hand is not worth playing against a 3-bet, take it out of the range and replace it with something else. Your goal is to keep your 3-bet defense at roughly that 33% or so. If you're defending in position, you can, up that to 35, 38% defense. If you're defending out of position, maybe go down to 30, 31, 32%, something like that. But you want to be roughly that 33% range. And then, of course, anytime you adjust those ranges, print them up again and put them to the test once again. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/smartpokerstudy. They have over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. And that includes both of my books, How to Study Poker, Volumes 1 and 2. And when my next book comes out, it'll be there as well for you. And on last week's MED Monday episode, I talked about how I just finished Tommy Angelo's book, Elements of Poker again. It was my first time listening to it on audiobook, and man, that was a great audiobook. Totally worth it. If you've never heard it, or not heard it, if you've never read the book, you've got to pick it up on Audible. Totally worth it. So get your free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/smartpokerstudy. And a few quick shoutouts for you today. Jason Roberts and Mr. Farah purchased Poker Tracker 4 through my affiliate. I really do appreciate it. They've decided to up their game to the next level, learn more from their online play. Sure, you can fit in more hands if you're playing 2, 3, 4 tables online, but just playing them is one thing. Actually studying them, and analyzing them later on. And that's what Poker Tracker 4 allows you to do. Actually doing that work is what's really going to progress your game. So Jason and Mr. Farah, you guys are on your way to rocking it. If you want the Poker Tracker 4 for yourself, just go to smartpokerstudy.com/pokertracker4, just like Jason and Mr. Farah did. And Andrew Banney, along with Orlando Imperio, both purchased the Smart HUD from me. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I do appreciate it. Along with that Smart HUD, I sent you all those different video links to get more out of the HUD and more out of Poker Tracker 4. So watch those videos, study up on it, and practice that HUD use. It'll pay for itself in no time. And George Kellerman purchased the Rejamming Like a Boss webinar. He's a tournament player, wants to take advantage of those short stack situations, maybe near the bubble, beyond the bubble, final table, winning more money. He is learning how to do it with some good 3-bet rejam. So thank you very much, George. And lastly, I want to thank John Parasitis for giving me a quote from Socrates. He said, "I'm getting older while being taught until the end of my time." And I've talked about Kaizen before. I've mentioned it within my prior 2 books. And Kaizen is the Japanese idea of never-ending, constant improvement. Continuously going out there, studying, learning, trying to do better, trying to be better. And apparently Socrates had that exact same idea. So thank you very much for that quote, John. I appreciate it. Alrighty, back to class, poker people. So I want to give you 6 critical in-game factors when you're facing a 3-bet. So we just talked about creating ranges, and you do not rely strictly on your ranges. They're just a starting point. It's up to you and your assessment of the situation that you're getting yourself into. That's going to determine if defending against a 3-bet is positive EV or not. You know, we just put pocket 9s in the calling range of cutoff versus button. Well, if you look at the situation and it's pretty obvious that this button is only 3-betting with aces and kings, forget the 9s. Don't bother calling. It's not worth it right there. Just fold the 9s against that opponent. You know, you really need to think about each situation. Ranges are not a de facto answer. Ranges are not going to make you suddenly turn from a losing player into a winning or a break even into a winning player. You know, what ranges are going to do, if you understand the ranges, they're going to help you make better on the fly, in the moment, in-game decisions. So here are the 6 critical factors that you must take into account before you click call or raise versus a 3-bet. Critical factor number 1 is obviously your hand. So you open raised with this hand, but is it in your 3-bet defense range? If not, you need to be highly predisposed to just folding it then and there. You've already determined the correct defense frequency, and you've selected worthy hands to fill that frequency. You chose not to include this hand, whatever hand it is, pocket 7s, ace 4 suited, whatever. You chose not to include it in your 3-bet defense range, so it's not worthy of calling. But like I just mentioned, ranges are a starting point. They're not meant to be followed blindly, because poker is situational, and there's going to be other factors like the 5 I'm going to talk about in a little bit. Those factors might make defending with the hand that you're dealt, it might make it positive EV in this situation. So if you determine that, hey, this hand is a good 4-bet, this hand is a good call, then go ahead and make it, whether it's in your range or not. But just as a simple default to free up that brain space while you're playing online poker. If it's not in the range, just fold it. And speaking of your particular hand, people love to set mine with deuces through 6s. You should only set mine versus the 3-bet if you have math on your side with pot odds and implied odds. Also, it helps if you're calling the 3-bet with a set mining hand if you're in position and your opponent has post-flop weaknesses. Because if you're in position and they got weaknesses, if you don't hit your set, there's possibly other ways that you can earn the pot post-flop. Alright, critical factor number 2 is the 3-better's tendencies. In general, when you're facing a 3-bet, if you're thinking about defending, you want to attack weakness and avoid strength. So your response must be dictated in part on how frequently your opponent makes aggressive pre-flop 3-bets. So if you're up against a maniac who 3-bets way too frequently, you can 4-bet and you can call with wider value ranges. Versus those nits that I just talked about, like a nit on the button who only 3-bets with kings or better, you must fold most of your hands as you're going to be dominated in the growing 3-bet pot. Make sure you have your HUD up. All of you Poker Tracker 4 and Smart HUD users, have that HUD up and be sure to make note of the types of hands that you've seen your opponent 3-bet in the past. Every single bit of information that you have against your opponent, whether you type out the hands that they've 3-bet with in the past, you've made note of their sizing or of the sizings that they've used, and you see their stats in their HUD, all that information is going to help you to defend a bit better against their 3-bets. The next critical factor is the size of the 3-bet. So the size determines the pot odds that you are being offered to continue with a call. So if the pot odds are good, a call might be more in order. If the pot odds are terrible, let's say you open to 3 big blinds and this guy raised it 5x to 15 big blinds, you better have a darn good hand before you decide to call. In general, smaller 3-bets should be called more often. Bigger 3-bets should be called less often. So earlier I used an example of you making it 3 big blinds, your opponent min raising you to 5 big blinds. You only had to call 2 to win a total pot of 8.5, which was 24% equity needed, right? Well, if you take a look at any specific hand versus the 3-bet range, and your hand has 24% equity, only 24%, it's probably not good enough. So if you open up Flopzilla and you compare pocket 2s versus a 3-betting range of kings, aces, and ace-king suited, pocket 2s actually has 26% equity. But here's the thing, this is pre-flop equity. How often do you really think those pocket 2s are going to make it past the flop, past the turn, past the river, all the way to showdown against a very tight 3-betting range like this? Hardly ever, right? In that math example, sure, calling 2 means we only need 24% equity. Pocket deuces has 26% equity. But that really isn't good enough. What you need to think about is how often your hand is actually going to realize its equity. Hands like pocket aces, they're so darn strong that just due to their absolute strength, they're going to realize their equity quite often because they're going to make it to showdown with at least a pair or better, right? Other hands like 10-9 suited, great, it's a suited connector, but that suited and connectedness that it has is going to allow it to realize its equity so much more often than pocket deuces. 10-9 suited in Flopzilla versus aces, kings, and ace-king suited, it has 26% equity as well, just like the deuces. But I would much rather call with the 10-9 suited anytime versus a tight 3-betting range than calling with the pocket deuces, just because that 10-9 suited is going to give me a bit more post-flop playability. So the fourth key consideration before you click that button is the 3-better's range. So the prior two factors, their tendencies and their sizing, it's going to give you important information that will help you put your opponent on a range of 3-betting hands. You're going to use these along with your opponent's history to assign them a 3-betting range. It's pretty obvious they're 3-betting for a reason, right? You need to ask yourself what that reason is. Are they only 3-betting for value? Or are they the kind of player that likes to mix things up and they got plenty of bluffs mixed in with their pocket aces and pocket kings hands? In general, if their HUD 3-bet percentage is below 5%, that's a value-heavy range. Anything above 5%, it includes weaker hands, and it grows exponentially with more weaker hands the higher it goes. Like if you go to the show notes page, you're going to see a screenshot of a 5% range. Very value-heavy. You're also going to see a screenshot of a 10% range. Totally full of bluffs right there. You can fight back a lot more versus that opponent who has plenty of bluffs in their range. The fifth critical consideration is in position versus out of position. So position, of course, is a critical factor when deciding whether or not to defend against a 3-bet. When you have positional advantage, you can defend with 4-bets and calls a little bit more liberally. And when you're out of position, you've got to tighten up, have a smaller 3-bet defense range. Position is the advantage in poker, and it's even more important in those bigger 3-bet pots. But here's the thing about position, something that you learned from that last episode, number 180. I have a tendency to use position to kind of justify making bad calls. You don't want to rely on just position to determine if a call is good or not. You want to look at your opponent's post-flop HUD stats in 3-bet pots to see what you can expect to face if the hand gets to the flop, whether in position or out of position. They might be the kind of player, yeah, you may be in position, calling with a king 5 suited, thinking you can use that to your advantage. But maybe your opponent, when they're a 3-better, maybe they c-bet 75 and then 75% again on the turn. You're going to be facing so much aggression. It's going to be very costly for you to put some in-position raises into place to try to take pots from him. And the final, 6th consideration is the stack-to-pot ratio. So with a low stack-to-pot ratio, your 3-betting opponents, they're going to be less likely to fold. They're thinking to themselves, hey, I've got a big hand. I made the 3-bet pre-flop. I've already put, $2.50 in the pot. There's no way I'm folding in this $6 pot with only $8 behind. And conversely, when the stack-to-pot ratio is big, there are so many more chips at risk, which leads to potentially more ways that you can get your opponent to fold and greater value that you can earn if you are making those pre-flop calls and 4-bets. So when the stack-to-pot ratio is small, you want to be less prone to calling, and maybe just stick with a value 4-bet range or call with just the best of your range. And if the stack-to-pot ratio is high, then you can call a little bit more with some speculative hands or hands that aren't just so strong yet, but on the right boards, they can give you some great opportunities. Challenge! Here's my challenge to you for this episode. Create your own 3-bet defense ranges. Follow the steps that I outlined here today and just, very simply, create your own. Of course, you need to know your open raising ranges ahead of time, but once you know those, take the time to create your 3-bet defense ranges and then divide them up between 4-bets and calls. And then over the next week or two, in every session you play, test them out, assess them afterwards, and then make some adjustments if necessary. Now it's your turn to take action and do something positive for your poker game.
Oh, that's it now. Get out there and be somebody. Go write a book.
So this episode isn't complete until you head to the show notes page at www.smartpokerstudy.com/pod181. When you go there, you'll see the screenshots as well as the bonus range creation video I made for you. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm putting out more episodes, so make sure you enable my Alexa flash briefing skill. Just search for Smart Poker Study in the Amazon store. And of course, subscribe in iTunes or your favorite podcatching app. And if you can type or say the word Smart Poker Study, you can find me on Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And next week is a Q&A, so if you have any questions, send them on in. sky@smartpokerstudy.com. Alrighty, poker people, you'll catch me back this Monday for an MED Monday episode, on Wednesday for a Walking Wednesday episode, and then later on next week, episode 182, like I just said, is going to be a Q&A, so send those questions in now. Word of mouth is the best advertising, so thank you very much for sharing the show with other poker people. Your sharing and caring is what helps us grow. Until next time, study smart, play much, and make your next session the best one yet.